Within each issuance, project prioritization and timelines will be determined by the construction management team in accordance with the priorities of the board of 1, accommodating growth, 2, addressing safety and security needs, and 3, enhancing student achievement. Projects shall be planned to maximize efficiency and effectiveness while minimizing impact on student learning. Planning will consider such factors as procurement, contractor availability, disruption to school logistics and programs, seasonal impacts, weather, and certainly cost. So with that in mind, that's kind of the verbal, I see it, direction. When this gets turned over to a construction management team, there's enough specificity from the standpoint of the board's priorities that when they start looking at this, they feel like they have some direction also. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side. Thank you, Mark. This page is broken down into 3 columns, essentially, 3 sections horizontally. The far left, starting at the top, it says issuance number 1. You'll see the project categories, as Mr. Streep referenced. New construction. Within new construction has an elementary school, a middle school, an innovation and learning center. Under remodels and additions, there's some specificity here and some flexibility both, but this, the components that are identified specifically are classroom addition at Discovery Canyon, classroom addition Pine Creek, classroom addition and expansion of the commons at Liberty, and where there's modulars, those modulars would be removed also. Air Academy High School Building B remodel, remember that's the predominantly science classrooms. School in the Woods building, construct a building, remove the modulars. Da Vinci's to enclose, Da Vinci and Rockrimmon to enclose classrooms. Elementary school, I put them all together instead of identifying multiple elementary schools, but essentially remodel the entryways for the security reasons at the elementary schools. After that, remodel the entries at the middle schools, add air conditioning to Da Vinci, and then Douglas Valley, the DV.
I know.
Douglas Valley Elementary School, air conditioning, and then there were several other projects that are lumped together in that it says other remodels, additions, I shouldn't say projects, but dollar amounts that are combined there, because some of this is obviously balancing to 160, right? So you got to kind of work backwards from there. So there's just under $5 million of, I'll use the word flexibility here, but it's still within the bounds of what's written in that note at the bottom, which is growth, safety, security, student achievement. The next category of projects is the fairness formula. You can see that reads the 14.522 million. That's the entire amount going out that first phase, first issuance. Technology infrastructure is $5.5 million of the 14.5 in that first round. Facilities audit is about $5 million in that first round. Board contingency, as you can see, is identified not as the total amount, but a certain component in that first round. And then the Classical Academy, just to remind you, the Classical Academy's component is the 9.15%, which is their total of each issuance. So that's just a simple calculation. And you can see it totals vertically to the $160 million. And then you'll also see when we get done that they total horizontally to the different project total or category totals. So that's issuance number 1. If we mark, and thank you, slide over and up a little bit. Issuance number 2, obviously, is shorter for many reasons, mainly of which it's 1/4 of the amount in dollars that was in issuance 1. You see new construction has the 2nd elementary school. North Fork is that Pine Creek area again. That's $21 million. Remodels and additions, again, this is blank on purpose. That's the other, the project list is already out there. So there's remaining projects. Those would be left up to the construction management team, because now we're getting out a couple years also. Whatever the environment is at that point, they can react to at that time. But the project list is still the project list. The resolution that you passed on August 18th is still what's happening. Doesn't mean because this is blank right here that there's no projects there. The project list is still the project list. They're just picking the projects off there that fit within that timeline, that dollar amount, for all the reasons we've talked about already. You can see the fairness formula at that point is at 0 because it's already been issued. I'm going to put a little side note in here about the fairness formula component. $14.5 million could go out in that first round, right? And just to be clear, you're not going to see Marita or Linda or Tom walking around the district with big checks, handing them over to schools. They're being allocated like points or dollars. They get to choose the projects, as we promised them they could, and their committees have been working on. Our procurement staff bundles the projects for cost efficiencies. For example, if 10 schools want new flooring, and each individual school is 10,000 square feet, we could bid out 10,000 square feet 10 different times, once for each school, or we could bundle it all together and put it all as one package to bid it out, and the unit cost will come down. That's one of those efficiency pieces. So that's one of the components that they can do also. But it may take a while. We learned this in 2001. I shouldn't say we. I wasn't a part of it. I learned from looking back in history that either by timing, either by decision making, either by principals wanting to time it a certain way because of programmatic interruption or interference, they may want something to happen over the summer, and we can't make it happen over this particular summer. It's got to wait one summer. We could go ahead and bid it and contract it and get everything in place, but the timeline may be waiting down the road, which means payments may be waiting down the road. It may take several years for those fairness formula dollars to actually flow out the door and actually to be paid to vendors. So in the meantime, that creates potential other flexibility. I'm going to call this, I don't have a really great word for it, but I'm going to call it cash flow flexibility. I'm not sure, certainly up to you, you can give feedback on it, but if $14.5 million is allocated out there to each school, and some of the schools' projects, some of them may happen early, some of them may happen later in the process, but in the meantime, I'm just going to throw out a number. Let's say that a school has projects planned, and the construction management team agrees on that planning period. The procurement happens either in pieces or as a whole group, depending on the timing. Does it make sense? Let me use $1 million of the $14.5 million. Does it make sense for that $1 million to sit for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years being unspent when there are other projects that may be accelerated and plugged in there, right? They didn't lose their money. That's why I call it more of a cash flow piece. And you do other projects earlier, maybe facility auto projects, maybe some other kinds of things that fit within that dollar amount. And essentially you're trading out then. The school's still going to get their project when they want their project done, but the money's not reserved and sitting there doing nothing for the district. We could get more done. So just a thought on how sometimes the reality and the logistics of reality, working through some of this, it's important to be flexible from that standpoint also. With that said,
Mr. Berry, are you saying, we as a board were pretty specific that it's on fairness dollars or formula dollars, we want to release $14.5 million up front, or our willingness, because we were very specific about that, our willingness to release $14.5 million up front. But as you go and talk with the construction management team, if we assume that the bond passes, you talk to the construction management team, the contracting or the purchasing side, and everybody looks at the critical path of all of this. Even though we say we're willing to do this, you might have schools come back and say, we appreciate that, but let's get this project or this major project done first before we start using some of our formula dollars, and therefore we're okay but let's take our money in issuance too. Is that what you're saying, that scenario is probably happen, or?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And instead of trying to figure out today what that might be and saying, okay, $14.5 million, let's do X of that in the first issuance and Y in the second issuance and Z in the third, because we really, at least I would have trouble doing that today because I'm not sure exactly what the timelines of all these things might look like, is you can go ahead and allocate it, but just know it could be spread out over time. And at that same point, let me interject one other thing because it's important. I think it fits in well here. Let's say we agree on a framework like something like this going forward. Please know that these are bond dollars, and you will be required. You can't escape. I'll put it that way. You're not washing your hands and turning it over to a construction management team and hoping for the best. You're going to turn it over to a construction management team with framework, and they're going to come back to you. And they're going to say, okay, here's what we propose. And you respond to that, and they can modify it or you can approve it. And it's going to be project by project because these are bond dollars. It's different than what you've been used to in the school district, where there's different thresholds of purchasing authority. Bond dollars are very different. They're highly protected, and by our own doing, we want those approved by the board each time. So to Mr. Streep's point there, some of these projects may change in timeline, get pushed out a year, or for whatever good reasons there may be, but that's not going to happen without you knowing it's happening and you eventually approving it to happen. So these things will come back, whether it's the example that Mr. Streep just gave, whether it's an example of roofing projects or large construction projects, either one of them, just know that this will come back to you again and again. So another reason that I think you can be comfortable leaving some flexibility in there is that all of these will come back and you'll get to ask all the questions that you feel appropriate at that time, each time. Okay. So continuing,
Well,
yes, sir.
Before we lead that, to a question that was, or an issue that was brought up by one of our commenters earlier in the evening. Bond dollars are, by their nature, restricted.
Correct.
They reside in a restricted fund. They cannot be used for operating expenses. They can only be used for these projects, and we will approve them open project by project by project.
Correct.
I apologize for being out of order, but is this presentation material available? I don't see it anywhere on here, nor was it available earlier.
Presentation material, it's on the screen.
Yes. Oh, so it's not available
To the
to the
public?
public?
No, it's
Yeah,
on the screen.
We don't have it either.
Yes.
We're looking at the same thing you're looking at.
All right, thank you.
The way I would state that, Mr. Borland, maybe layman's terms is the bond dollars come, or the bond proceeds come as a certain color money, and that color never changes. It will forever remain until the projects are complete. However many years down the road, that money will stay that same color the whole time, which means it's restricted for that purpose the whole time. I'm going to continue working down the list. So that was the fairness formula, has $0 in issuance 2. Technology infrastructure has a component of $7 million in that second issuance. Yep, okay. You can see the board, the facility audit has a little over $3 million, $3.2 million in there. And the board contingencies component, again, has a piece. Classical Academy has, again, their 9.15%. And you can see vertically that totals then to the $40 million that's in the issuance number 2. We move to the right, Mark. You can see that the new construction in issuance 3 has nothing because it's all been consumed at that point. So there's 0 allocation for new construction in that third issuance. Remodels and additions has a fairly large chunk in that third issuance. So this is a factor of the 3 different dollar amounts going out. The fairness formula, again, has already been allocated. Even though it still may be sitting waiting to be spent by some schools. There's no more allocation to happen. Technology infrastructure is the last $2 million for that program. Facility audits is the remaining $12 million. The board contingency has its remaining component, and the classical academy their remaining component. So the issuance 3 again totals the $30 million, and you can see how it's broken down. Obviously, what's in issuance 3 is somewhat a remainder calculation from 1 and 2. But again, based on the priorities that are established by the board. Then to the far right, or the rightmost column before the line numbers, you can see that verifies back, or that checks back to, reconciles back with the project totals that were in the resolution you passed on August 18th to total $230 million. With that, I'd be happy to listen to discussion, take comments, questions.
The starting question for the board, and I realize this is the first time that you have seen this, is it a fair reflection of the conversation that we had at the last board meeting? Is there anything that you remember that we talked about that is not?
Oh, can we put that back up?
Put that back up. Is there anything you remember discussing that is not shown on here? Mark, can you slide it over to the left? To that first one, I assume that's. Mr. Worthing?
For me, it captures what I was getting at in terms of not boxing us into decisions before we have adequate information to make the right decisions, and particularly when we're talking about dependencies. And I think Tom's example of, 10 times 10,000 square feet of carpet, 10 purchases of 10,000 square feet as opposed to 100,000 square feet of carpet is that. So for me, I think this is the good starting place, but I'm not looking for an exact answer, Tom, but I'm assuming that if the bond is successful, within fairly short order, we would have a much refined look at what issuance 1 would look like, a much more detailed and refined look.
Yeah, short order would be not only
I'm
for the
not looking
bond,
for a
but
couple of weeks.
when the makes me nervous. Not from necessarily just the bond date when we know it's a go or not, but with the hiring of the construction management team.
Of course.
Get those people in place, short order after that period of time.
Of course. And I guess again, to reiterate, the board will make the final decision on the projects, on the order in which they're done within this starting framework.
At that point, you'd have more like construction timelines and everything for these projects. So even project managers can show you those overlay charts that give timelines for different components. You'll have those for each project, and then you could overlay all of them so you can kind of see a big picture. But yes, that is correct.
Mrs. Gould?
So, Mr. Gregory, will this spreadsheet be put in our board packet for the record?
Well, at this point, I've titled it a working draft because it's in nowhere final yet. So when it becomes a final document, and that's further, whatever you guys decide tonight is what I will do for the next meeting or the meeting after that, or whatever the timeline is you decide.
Okay, and second question, Dr. Hatchell, we had some discussion last meeting about the ILC as to whether that should be in the first issuance. So is this on here because you determined that yes, it should be in the first issuance, or are you going off of what we were saying?
Both. I agree that it should be in the first issuance, as I think I heard partly from here. The other thing is, We need to get to work on Challenger Middle School, and it's hard for us to do that until the ILC is complete. It's part of that, you know, when you have a starting point, it's much easier for us to do that when it's open land, you know, and then the construction management team would scope along with procurement from there, but yes, we believe that that needs to happen.
There's so many dominoes in play here.
Yes. You know, we went back and forth on the Innovation Learning Center, but I think the reason that this is our recommendation is because we need to finish that before we can get to work on the middle of Challenger Middle School.
That really kind of ties in that framework of growth is the important side of it. Ms. Damian?
So, question for clarification there, is Challenger Middle School under the other remodel addition priorities, that 4.955 million? Where's that, because that was what I was specifically looking for, was Challenger Middle School.
It would be, under the way this is developed right now, it would fit in the second issuance under remodels and additions.
Okay.
That
From
makes
a
sense.
timing standpoint, at least, correct me if I'm wrong, Henry or Tom, that by the time you put together the entire ILC and design the entire thing, go out and start building it, by the time that is complete, that's when Challenger Learning Center, or not, I'm sorry, that's when remodels the Challenger and what has to happen would occur. So from a time standpoint, remember the conversation last time, 3 years sounds like a long time, but I think when we start going, it's not going to be quite as long as you think. And so even with some of the flexibility that, again, the way I see it, even some of the flexibility that you see, if you're going to build Challenger or remodel Challenger Middle School and it happens in issuance 2, you might be using some dollars to do the design work, because when you put an elementary school out in Wolf Ranch, the ILC, if it ends up on the same site, you want to get some economies of some of the design phase. You want to put all of that together, and so some of that can blend a little bit. But I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but if you try to stack up building the ILC by the time you're done with the ILC, and then you can move all the stuff over that are residing at Challenger right now, and then go to work on Challenger, that time's going to creep up on us probably pretty quickly. But construction management team and that whole group will be able to tell us exactly how this plays out. So it might, I don't know, it might, you asked the question, out of the 4.9, or just say $5 million, I always round, out of the $5 million, it's possible that the Challenger Learning Center, the Challenger Middle School, sorry, the Challenger Middle School, it might be possible that it's at the tail end of issuance 1, depending on what construction management says, or it might be at the beginning of issuance 2. So that's as we started talking last time, I would hate for us to try to say, well, let's make sure we do the renovations and upgrades to Challenger Middle School in issuance 1, but in fact, when construction management and that group comes back, they say, well, that would be great, except by the time we're done with ILC and get everything moved over, so we'll be in issuance 2. And as Mr. Berger said, you could use other dollars, or you could use those dollars for other things that don't have as many dependencies. Now, again, I don't know if I'm making sense on that.
Yes, I guess my question in all of this is, what is the time frame we think will take to construct the ILC? Because, you know, we had a time frame for elementary, we had a time frame for middle, but we didn't really talk about what the ILC time frame looks like. Is that closer to the longer end? Is it, you know, is that why we're thinking the way we're thinking? Do we know?
Oh, I think 1 year, Tom thinks 7.
Really? That's big variance.
My answer to that right now is that if it's to be built at the same site as one of our elementaries that's yet to be built, it would make sense to put them together, and their timelines for opening dates, if you will probably look similar. So, you know, it'd be, new construction is a little dirtier than a remodel, and I mean that from literally dirt. It'd be a little bit challenging to open up a new school, not impossible, but a brand new elementary school with the start of the construction for the Innovation and Learning Center when it ends. It'd be a little bit easier, and it'll make more sense to do them simultaneously at the same time. That's redundant, but simultaneously, so that they can kind of open at the same time. The interruption piece is not an issue at that point, and it's ready to go. Now, it may not be fully operable as far as the ILC goes, because the Challenger Learning Center is a piece of this too. That's another entity, and they would take care of their component of finish and equipment and all the stuff they would need to do for that component of the Innovation and Learning Center, the Challenger Learning Center component of the ILC.
So I guess to follow on to that, I think that we're all on the same page, but I just wanted to state that that's why I was asking the question about whether or not the Challenger Middle School remodel, in other words, is funding available for them in the first issuance, because if the ILC gets done in 2 years and we can start working, I don't want them to have to wait another year for the second issuance. That's why I was asking the question. And I think we're all on the same page.
And
as far as
those
that.
pieces and parts will come
Yeah,
after
that
construction
could get
management takes a look.
accelerated,
Yes.
but I just wanted to make sure that it can be, that we don't allocate all of that money in the first issuance so that then Challenger couldn't get moved up because we've allocated it to other things. That's a priority.
Speaking outside of a construction manager, and Henry can correct me if I'm wrong, but imagine that the elementary school and ILC are under actual construction, shovel in ground, going. They've been designed, they've been procured, it's underway. At any point after that, the design component for Challenger Middle School can commence. That's what accelerates the process, is that months of design now is overlapping with actual construction. So that could accelerate or speed up shovel and ground. Not really that case at Challenger, but the remodel component. So there could be the overlap, but it may be the overlap of design while construction is happening, and when the time is right for issuance 2 or the end of issuance 1, it's ready to go, because that design component could take a while, especially in a school like Challenger that's a bit older.
Okay, very good. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page.
I'll give you an example. I'm going to take up more time. In the 2001 bond, there's something that happened that I think fits well into this. Discovery Canyon campus was, and I believe I have the years correct, I may be off by a year, but the bond passed in 2001. There was obviously a design procurement phase of that. I believe the year that it was supposed to be 3 phases. The original plan was build the elementary school, open the elementary school. It has students. While this is happening, the middle school component is being built. That was about 2 years. It was going to open, and then while it was operable with students,